"Stop resisting!" they screamed, while slamming my face into the hospital wall. My dying nephew was gasping for air behind them, begging me to help. I'd just called 911 like he asked, but these armed officers weren't there to save him. They came for me. And the voice on the sergeant's radio? It was scripted. Dangerous relative, interfering with care. My own brother staged it. He turned my emergency call into an ambush, then used forged papers to steal custody and Danny's trust fund. I had nothing left but one thing he didn't expect: proof. And in 72 hours, I'd burn it all down, by their own rules. My name is Michael Carver, and I'm 45 years old. I spend most nights in the oncology ward's vinyl chair beside my nephew Danny's bed, catching sleep between nurse rounds and monitor beeps. His parents, my sister Sarah and her husband Jim, drifted away months ago, leaving me to handle the appointments, bills, and midnight fever spikes. The antiseptic smell mingles with burnt coffee from the ancient vending machine down the hall, and I've memorized every pattern of Danny's vital sign monitors. My brother Thomas hasn't spoken to me since our last holiday fight about money and family responsibility, long before Danny got sick. I keep everything documented: appointment times, receipts, medical discussions, filed in color-coded folders. Something feels off lately. Whispered conversations stop when I approach, and doors that used to stay open are suddenly locked. But let me start from the beginning. That night started like any other. The fluorescent lights hummed their usual drone while I settled into my spot next to Danny's bed, the vinyl chair creaking under my weight. 3 months of hospital nights had taught me every rhythm of this place. The soft squeak of nurses' shoes at shift change, the distant ding of the elevator, the steady chirp of Danny's heart monitor marking time like a faithful metronome. You know that feeling when the air changes just before a storm? That's how it felt when Danny's hand shot out and gripped my wrist. His fingers were ice cold, nothing like the warm-hearted kid who'd spend hours telling me about his baseball card collection. "Uncle Mike," he wheezed, eyes glassy with fear. "Call 911. My stomach dropped as I watched his chest heave. The monitor's gentle beeping turned into a shrill warning, its green waveform spiking wildly. I fumbled for my phone, thumb trembling as I punched in the numbers. 911, what's your emergency? Room 412. 4th floor, St. Mary's Hospital. I managed to get out. My nephew. The double doors at the end of the corridor burst open with a bang that made me jump. 4 police officers in tactical vests stormed in, weapons drawn. My mind couldn't process what I was seeing. Why would SWAT respond to a medical emergency? "Against the wall," the lead officer barked. "Hands where we can see them." Before I could speak, they had me pinned face first against the cold cinder block. My phone clattered to the floor, the 911 operator's voice still tiny and tinny through the speaker. "Wait," I gasped. "My nephew needs help." "Stop resisting!" Another officer twisted my arm higher behind my back. "You're interfering with patient care!" The hospital staff, hovering in the doorway, looked as confused as I felt. Danny was reaching for me, but a wall of black Kevlar blocked my view. The fear in his eyes cut deeper than the handcuffs biting into my wrists. "Please," I tried reasoning with them. "Just look at his chart. I'm his guardian. I've been here A sergeant's radio crackled to life. "Be advised, suspect is a dangerous relative attempting to interfere with treatment. Approach with caution." My blood ran cold. That wasn't a live report. It was too polished, too practiced. Someone had scripted this takedown before I ever dialed 911. The metal handcuffs pressed against my spine as they held me there. I could still hear the phone line ringing on the floor. Help that would never arrive because someone else's help had gotten here, impossibly fast. The pieces started falling into place. The locked doors, the whispered conversations, the staff's nervous glances. This wasn't a response to an emergency. It was an ambush. "Get him out of here," the sergeant ordered. Just as the 911 operator's voice finally asked, "Sir, are you still there?" They marched me toward the exit, past wide-eyed nurses and Danny's terrified face. Every step took me further from my nephew, who needed me, now more than ever. But someone wanted me gone badly enough to orchestrate this whole scene. The question was who, and why they couldn't risk leaving me by that bedside 1 minute longer. The security team escorted me down fluorescent hallways like I was some kind of criminal. My wrists still burned from the handcuffs when they finally pushed me into what they called a family consultation room. It was one of those windowless boxes hospitals keep for bad news, all muted paintings and tissue boxes. I'd barely caught my breath when Linda Chen, the hospital administrator, swept in with her clipboard and professional sympathy. "You know the type. someone who's mastered saying "unfortunately" while checking their watch. "Mr. Carver," she said, settling into her chair like she was about to sell me life insurance, "we have multiple concerns already documented regarding your involvement in Daniel's care." The door opened again, and there he was, my brother Robert, looking fresh-pressed in his usual business casual, like he'd just stepped out of a board meeting instead of ambushing his own family at midnight. The sight of him made my jaw clench. We hadn't spoken since that Christmas blow-up about Danny's medical bills, but here he was, suddenly playing concerned guardian. "I have the paperwork right here," Robert announced, waving a stack of official-looking documents. The way Linda nodded at those papers, you'd think they were carved in stone. "Remember when we were kids, and Robert could talk his way out of anything?" That smooth voice hadn't changed a bit. "Michael's becoming unstable," he said, each word calculated. "His medical interference is putting Daniel at risk. The trust requires financial clarity." Trust. There it was. The real reason for this midnight theater. "I want to see Danny," I cut in, but the security guard's hand twitched toward his radio. "He asked me to call 911. He needs—" "That's your subjective interpretation," Linda interrupted, consulting her clipboard like it held universal truths. "The hospital board has recognized Mr. Robert Carver's authority in medical decisions, pending review." "Let me see these alleged reports," I said, reaching for the papers Robert kept shuffling. Linda's professionally blank expression didn't waver. "I'm afraid those are confidential. The board supports the guardian of record." Guardian of record. The phrase hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd been there through every fever, every midnight panic, every small victory, while Robert couldn't be bothered to return a phone call. But now he was speaking their language, dropping words like protocols and liability that matched the sergeant's radio, script word for word. The whole thing stank of rehearsal. Every nod from Linda, every concerned frown, every casual mention of the trust fund. It was choreographed. The hospital board wasn't neutral. They were players in whatever game Robert was running. My fingers found my visitor badge, the plastic worn from months of wear. Linda's eyes followed the movement. "That won't be necessary anymore," she said softly. I walked to the badge reader. Anyway, knowing what would happen but needing to see it. The light flashed red, that little electronic chirp sounding like a door slamming shut. The security guard's hand landed heavy on my shoulder. "You're done here." Looking back at Robert's satisfied smirk, I realized he'd finally found a way to win, not by doing right by Danny, but by turning the system itself against me. He'd always been good at working angles, but this time he'd orchestrated a whole damn symphony. They'd planned it all. The SWAT response, the midnight meeting, the pre-written reports. While I'd been counting Danny's breaths and tracking his meds, they'd been building their case. Every document Linda clutched, every policy she cited, was another brick in the wall they'd put between me and my nephew. The security guard's grip stayed firm as we rode the elevator down. His radio crackled with codes I used to know by heart, back when they meant help was coming, not being forced out. The numbers blinked down. 4, 3, 2, 1. "Just so we're clear," he said as the doors opened. "You're not on the approved visitor list anymore. Try to come up, and we'll have to involve the police. Again." Have you ever felt your whole world shrink to the size of a hospital lobby? Everything I'd built over the past year. The trust with the nurses, the rapport with doctors, the daily routines that kept Danny going. All of it vanished in the time it took those elevator doors to close. The automatic doors whooshed open, and suddenly I was outside. The night air hit me like a slap, thick with the smell of coming rain and bus exhaust. All I had was my phone, and the echo of Danny's voice begging me to call 911. Some protector I turned out to be. I pulled up patient relations in my contacts. The number I'd never needed before because I'd always handled things face to face. The recording was chipper, professional. "You've reached patient relations. Our office hours are Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Please leave a detailed message." Legal services wasn't any better. The night receptionist sounded bored. "Someone will return your call within 5 business days. 5 days. Danny didn't have 5 days to wait for some lawyer to check their voicemail. I hung up and stared at my reflection in a puddle, trying to process how fast everything had turned. This wasn't just about losing access anymore. Robert had painted me as unstable, dangerous, the kind of uncle people whisper about at family reunions. From the parking lot, I could see Danny's floor. Shadows moved behind the blinds, nurses doing their rounds, maybe, or Robert putting on his concerned guardian act for the staff. The same staff who'd smiled at me that morning now probably saw me as a threat. The image of that boardroom kept flashing in my mind. Linda's practiced sympathy, Robert's calm smile as he dropped words like liability and protocols. The whole thing had the polished feel of a play where everyone knew their lines except me. You ever notice how hospitals feel different from the outside? All those lit windows like eyes staring down, judging. I pressed my back against a concrete column, letting its coolness anchor me while I talked through the timeline out loud. Had to keep it straight for whatever appeal I could manage. Okay, so Danny asked for 911 at, I checked my call log, 11:42 p.m. SWAT team arrived about 2 minutes later, which means someone called them before Danny ever said anything. I nearly jumped out of my skin. A man in paramedic blues was leaning against the ambulance bay wall, maybe 20 feet away. He'd been there during the chaos upstairs. I remembered his face when the tactical team pushed past the regular hospital security. You saw it too? I asked. He didn't answer directly, just kept watching me with this steady, evaluating look, like he was putting together pieces of his own puzzle. The rain started falling then, soft and constant, but neither of us moved for cover. There we stood, two strangers in the dark, connected by nothing except the knowledge that something wasn't right about tonight. He didn't look away, and I didn't either. Sometimes silence says more than words ever could. The weight of Danny's baseball cap in my jacket pocket pressed against my ribs. I'd grabbed it from his room that morning, promising to wash it. Such a simple thing, now feeling like evidence of all I couldn't protect him from. Ever try riding in a car while rain drums the roof? The dome light cast just enough glow to see my scribbles, but every drop on the windshield scattered shadows across the page. I'd filled 3 pages with timestamps, names, exact phrases, anything that might matter later. You learn to document everything when dealing with hospital bureaucracy, sort of like keeping receipts for when life tries to shortchange you. 2:15 a.m. Multiple concerns already on file. Linda Murray. Admin 2:17 a.m. Guardian of Record. Mentioned 3x2:20 a.m. Sergeant's radio. Dangerous relative situation. The words started blurring together after a while. My hand cramped, but I kept writing. You know that feeling when you're so tired your bones ache, but your mind won't shut off? That was me, hunched over my notebook like it was some kind of shield against what had happened. I crafted my complaint the way you'd defuse a bomb. Careful, precise, nothing that could blow up in my face. No emotions, just facts, times, places, witnesses, the kind of details that make it hard for people to twist your words later. When the sky started lightening to that pre-dawn gray, I grabbed my folder and headed for the security desk. Figured the shift change might work in my favor. Fresh eyes, maybe someone who hadn't been part of last night's drama. Remember that antiseptic hospital smell I mentioned? It hits different when you're walking in as an outsider. The guard barely glanced at my paperwork before pointing to a sign. Administration office hours, Monday, Friday, 8 a.m., 4:30 p.m. Can't you just... We don't handle complaints, he said, already looking past me at his computer screen. I stepped back, letting a cluster of nurses shuffle past. They were talking low, but in that empty lobby, whispers carried. Can't believe they're fast-tracking it. Orders all changed at midnight. Never seen protocol push this quick. My stomach nodded. Fast-tracking what? What orders? I wanted to grab them, demand answers, but that'd just prove Robert right about me being unstable. Instead, I found a bench and pulled out my notes again. Started comparing the sergeant's radio chatter with Linda's careful statements. The same phrases kept popping up. Concerning behavior, patient, safety, necessary intervention, too polished, too practiced, like actors hitting their marks in a play they'd rehearsed. For a second, just a second, I considered calling Robert. Maybe if I apologized, promised to back off. My thumb even hovered over his number. But you know what happens when you give in to bullies? They just learn that pressure works. My phone buzzed, breaking the thought. Unknown number. I watched it ring once, twice, then stop. Probably another robocall. But 30 seconds later, it started again. Hello? Static crackled. Then a gravelly voice I recognized from the hallway chaos. I saw what they did. My pulse kicked up. Who is this? Someone who knows that response team was way over the line. He paused. Meet me by the loading dock. 5 minutes. The line went dead before I could answer. I sat there for a moment, weighing options. Could be a trap. Robert, trying to catch me breaking the no-contact order. Could be someone looking to sell a story to the press. But that voice, I'd heard it during the chaos, arguing with the tactical team about excessive force. My notebook felt heavy in my pocket as I stood. Sometimes the only way forward is through the dark. I walked toward the loading dock. where a single security light cast more shadows than illumination. A figure waited at the edge of the light, and I recognized the paramedic's uniform from earlier. The figure stepped forward, and I almost dropped my notebook. Carl Mitchell? Been a while, Carver. He looked older than our high school days. Who didn't? But that crooked grin hadn't changed. About 3 weeks ago, I was on the rig that brought Danny in with that fever spike. Kids got your eyes, you know. My shoulders relaxed a fraction. You were arguing with the tactical team earlier. Yeah, because that response was pure theater. Carl glanced over his shoulder, then pulled out a dispatch log. Look at this. Command flagged it as family interference before anyone even laid eyes on Danny. That sound right to you? I shook my head. Dispatch doesn't classify calls that fast. Exactly. Someone wanted those officers there, primed and ready. I've been running emergency calls 15 years. Never seen response patterns like that without choreography. The rain had stopped, but water still dripped from the loading dock's overhang. Each drop hit the puddles like a ticking clock. Would you testify to that? If it came to it, already documented everything. Times, radio codes, response patterns, all of it. One subpoena, and those incident logs are yours. Carl pulled out a clipboard. But we need to move fast. Your brother's got friends in administration. I spread my binder on the clipboard. I've got every receipt, every appointment text, every care note since Danny's diagnosis. Been keeping records since Robert started sniffing around the trust fund, Carl finished. When I looked up sharply, he shrugged. Small town. People talk. Yeah, well, talking won't help Danny now. I flipped through my pages. We need proof Robert orchestrated this. Carl nodded, clicking his pen. Okay, let's break it down. First, we reconstruct the call chain. Who contacted dispatch, when, what exactly they said. I can pull run sheets, time cards, show who talked to who. I've got texts from the nurses about Danny's stats right before everything went sideways. I pulled out my phone. Screenshots, timestamps, the works. Good. Keep those messages safe. Carl's face turned serious. But listen, we're racing the clock here. I glimpsed Danny's new orders while they were processing my paperwork. They've got him scheduled for some new protocol in 72 hours. My stomach dropped. What protocol? Couldn't see details, but it's not standard treatment. Pushed through fast, minimal review. He checked his watch. That's 3 days to stop whatever they're planning. I started organizing papers into piles. I'll put together a sworn chronology. Everything I've seen, heard, documented. You pull those dispatch records? Already on it. Carl tucked the clipboard under his arm. I'm back on shift in 4 hours. I'll copy everything I can access without raising flags. We divided tasks, exchanged numbers. The eastern sky was turning pearl gray, but all I could think about was that clock ticking down. 72 hours. Whatever this new protocol was, Robert had rushed it onto Danny's chart awful quick for something that was supposed to help. One more thing, Carl said as he turned to leave. That trust fund of Danny's, how much we talking about? Enough to tempt people into doing stupid things. I looked up at Danny's dark window. Why? Because fast-tracking experimental treatments? That's not about helping patients. That's about insurance payouts and kickbacks. He patted his clipboard. Follow the money, Carver. Always follow the money. I checked my watch. 5:47 a.m. 72 hours, minus whatever minutes had already slipped away. My notebook felt heavier now, weighted with purpose instead of just pain. We had a plan. We had proof building. But somewhere in that hospital, a mysterious protocol was waiting for Danny, and every second brought it closer. The next morning hit me like a freight train. I'd managed maybe 2 hours of sleep in my car, but Carl showed up at 6 a.m. sharp with 2 coffees and a game plan. Legal channels first, he said, handing me a steaming cup. Everything by the book. Let them hang themselves with their own red tape. We camped out in the hospital cafeteria. That familiar smell of burnt coffee and bleach hanging in the air. Remember those old-school request forms with carbon paper? We filled out stacks of them. Patient records, incident reports, dispatch logs. You name it, we requested it. And every time they stamped denied across one, Carl documented it with his phone camera. Each refusal's another nail in their coffin, he muttered, taking pictures. Shows pattern. Around 9, Carl disappeared into the EMS office and came back with something that made my hands shake. Sanitized dispatch audio. He pulled me into an empty conference room and hit play on his phone. Dispatch, be advised. The operator's voice crackled. Family interference situation per hour. Carver. I checked the timestamp. 9:47 p.m. That was 3 minutes before I even dialed 911. Your brother's name, Carl said quietly. In the call notes before anything happened, before Danny even asked for help. While I was processing that, Carl pulled out another piece of paper, an email printout from the EMS reporting system. The timestamp matched perfectly, 9:47 p.m. But it wasn't dispatch this time. It was from Patricia Wells, one of the hospital administrators, to someone in billing. Fast-track approvals confirmed, I read aloud. Protocol meets criteria for experimental pathway, eligible for high reimbursement. My coffee turned to acid in my stomach. This isn't about Danny's care at all. Keep reading, Carl said. I skimmed down. Pending guardian consent, anticipated insurance authorization, projected compensation schedule. Each line felt dirtier than the last. They're talking pure profit here. Not one word about whether this helps Danny. Money talks. Carl spread the papers across the table. And right now, it's telling us your brother's got the board in his pocket. I checked my watch. 48 hours left. The knot in my gut tightened when my phone buzzed with a hospital notification. Board meeting scheduled tomorrow. RE Daniel Matthews care plan. Robert's moving fast, I said, showing Carl the screen. He wants the board to rubber stamp whatever this protocol is. Or, Carl leaned forward. He just handed us our window. If we can get enough evidence organized before that meeting, we could freeze everything in court. I pulled out my binder. Emergency injunction. Stop them from touching Danny until a judge reviews. We shoved our coffee cups aside and started laying out documents in order. Dispatch logs, email trails, care notes. Every piece needed to tell the story clearly enough that even a busy judge would see the pattern. That's when I spotted it. A consent form dated last week with Danny's signature. Except, look at this. I held it under the fluorescent light. Compare it to his school permission slip from last month. Carl squinted. The Y is different, and the slant, forged. I said quietly. They forged his signature on medical consent. Between us, the evidence kept growing. Dispatch audio, administrative emails, falsified signatures. The money trail was right there in black and white, but all I could think about was Danny up in that room. Time ticking away while people traded his life for insurance payouts. I checked my watch again. 48 hours. The board would meet in 24, which meant we needed to be ready before then. Every exhibit tagged, every timeline verified, every argument bulletproof. Better call in sick tomorrow, Carl said, sorting papers into folders. We've got a long night ahead. I nodded, staring at that forged signature. The answer had been about money all along. Not Danny's care, not family concern, just cold hard cash. And my brother was at the center of it all, playing guardian while he lined his pockets. We had the proof. Now we just had to use it before time ran out. You ever notice how everyone writes their Ys differently? Some loop them wide, others keep them tight. Danny's Ys always had this little hook at the bottom. Picked it up from his art teacher in 4th grade. I'd watched him practice it for weeks, proud as could be of his signature move. Carl and I hunched over the conference room table, comparing documents under his phone's flashlight. The forged consent form's Ys were arrow straight. Look at the pressure. Points too, Carl said, angling the light. Your brother bears down when he writes. Leaves those little ridges in the paper. This signature's too smooth. I flipped through my binder, looking for something specific. There was a notary visit back in September. The plastic sheets crinkled as I searched. Danny signed his college savings paperwork. Had to do it officially because of the trust. Here. Carl pointed to a scan tucked in the medical records section. The timestamp read September 15th, 2:15 p.m. Compare that to the hospital's consent. The difference was stark. Danny's real signature had personality. Those hooked Ys, the slight upward slant he could never quite control. The hospital's version looked mechanical, like someone trying too hard to copy a style they didn't understand. They can't reproduce this timestamp either, I said, tapping the notary's seal. That's concrete proof of his actual signature, documented and dated. My phone buzzed. Another hospital email. Daniel Matthews. Capacity evaluation scheduled. 8:00 a.m. tomorrow. The words hit me like ice water. You spend enough time in hospitals. You learn their language. Capacity evaluation wasn't about medical status. It was about legal control. Jesus, Carl whispered, reading over my shoulder. They're going to declare him incompetent. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. Once Danny was legally incompetent, my brother would have total control. No more questions about consent forms. No more pesky relatives demanding oversight. The trust fund would be his to manage however he wanted. I called records, trying to get information on the evaluator. The clerk's voice was flat. That's confidential provider information. I'm his uncle. I've been his caregiver for years. I need to know this person's credentials. I understand your concern, but without current visitation rights. The line clicked dead. I slumped in my chair, the phone slipping from my fingers. Up in that room, Danny wasn't fighting his illness anymore. He was drowning in paperwork, suffocating under signatures and stamps while people in offices decided his fate. Remember that smell of antiseptic and coffee? The one I'd gotten so used to? Right. Then, it felt like it was choking me. My vision blurred. All those nights in hospital chairs, all those bills I'd paid, all those appointments I'd driven to, none of it mattered if I couldn't stop this. Hey, Carl's hand landed on my shoulder. Look at me, Mike. I tried to focus on his face, but the fluorescent lights were too bright. Truth needs a forum, he said firmly. That's what my old man used to say. All this evidence, it needs somewhere to land. Somewhere they can't bury it. Truth needs a forum. The words cut through my fog. Carl was right. We had proof of forgery, time-stamped discrepancies, documented patterns of suspicious behavior. But none of it meant anything if we kept it in this conference room. I pulled my laptop from my bag and opened a blank declaration template. 24 hours. The board would meet tomorrow, and right after that, they'd try to strip Danny of his legal voice forever. We couldn't let that happen. The next move had to be court. Had to be now, or there wouldn't be another chance. Start with the timeline, Carl said, arranging exhibits. Make it impossible to ignore. I positioned my fingers over the keys. The words Declaration of Michael Carver stared back at me from the screen. 24 hours to get this right. 24 hours to save my nephew. The cursor blinked, waiting for truth to find its forum. Carl and I commandeered a corner table at the 24-hour diner across from the courthouse. Empty coffee cups formed a barrier around stacks of documents as we built the declaration line by line. Every claim needed an exhibit. Every allegation required proof. Start with your relationship to Danny, Carl suggested, pushing a fresh coffee my way. Establish your history of care before you hit them with the conspiracy. I nodded, typing, I have been Danny Matthews' primary caregiver since his diagnosis 3 years ago. I have personally driven him to 147 medical appointments, spent 219 nights in hospital rooms, and maintained detailed records of all treatments and decisions. Good. Now bridge to the 911 call. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I described that night. Danny's plea, the armed response, the brother's sudden appearance with pre-written complaints. Each paragraph pointed to an exhibit. Dispatch recordings, email timestamps, suspicious consent forms. You ever notice how time moves differently at night? The diner's clock seemed to sprint and crawl at random. Every minute we spent perfecting language was a minute closer to that morning board meeting. Got something, Carl said around 3 a.m., hanging up his phone. 2 paramedics from my crew just signed statements about the officers. They saw everything. I read through their accounts. Both described seeing officers physically remove me before any medical assessment was done. Both noted the unusual speed of response and preloaded accusations on the radio. This is huge, I said, adding their statements to our evidence list. Shows the whole thing was staged. The judge needs to see that pattern, Carl agreed. The false reports, the rushed approvals, the money trail. It all fits. We finished the declaration just before 5 a.m., 12 hours until the board would vote, and even less until that capacity evaluation. My hands shook as I signed my name, swearing under penalty of perjury that every word was true. Carl watched me upload everything to the court's emergency filing system. The declaration, exhibits, and a request for an immediate temporary restraining order to stop both the new protocol and the competency evaluation. Now we wait, he said. I'd forgotten what sunrise looked like from the outside of a hospital. Pink light crept over the courthouse steps as my phone buzzed. The clerk had set a hearing. The judge's assistant followed with an email requesting original copies of key documents. They're actually going to hear us, I breathed. We spent the next hour in my car, printing exhibits at a 24-hour copy shop and organizing everything into a tabbed binder. Carl played the opposing counsel, grilling me on dates and details until I could recite them in my sleep. What about Danny's signature comparison? He asked. Exhibit C, showing the notarized original from September versus the suspicious consent form dated last week. The pressure points and letter formation don't match. The administrator's email about fast-tracking, Exhibit F, time-stamped before any medical necessity was documented. References insurance reimbursement rates instead of treatment benefits. I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. Exhausted eyes, wrinkled shirt. Carl insisted we stop at his place so I could borrow a tie. Professional appearance mattered, he said, especially in emergency hearings. My fingers fumbled with the knot. The last time I'd worn a tie was at Danny's high school graduation. He'd helped me straighten it, laughing at my clumsy attempts. The memory made me check my jacket pocket. Danny's baseball cap was still there, the one he'd asked me to keep safe when the fever started. Its worn brim had absorbed years of sun from long afternoons at the park. "Ready?" Carl asked as the courthouse doors came into view. Security wouldn't open for another 30 minutes, but other lawyers were already queuing up. My phone showed 6 a.m. 90 minutes until our hearing. The board still planned their 8 a.m. vote, and my brother had no idea we'd spent the night building a legal landmine. "Ready?" I said, patting the binder under my arm. Up in that hospital room, Danny was waiting. He might not know it yet, but his uncle was about to step into a courtroom and fight for his voice. The morning air felt sharp and clean as Carl and I joined the line. Above us, the courthouse windows caught the sunrise like signal fires. Ever been in a courtroom at sunrise? The wood panels catch that early light in a way that makes everything feel ancient and serious, like the room itself knows truth from lies. I stood at the podium with our tabbed binder while the judge flipped through my declaration. Carl's solid presence beside me helped steady my hands. You'd think after all those nights watching Danny's monitors, I'd be used to waiting for signals, but this was different. This time, the numbers and lines that mattered were in black and white before a judge who could actually stop the clock. "Mr. Carver," the judge said, looking up from the papers, "walk me through your timeline." I started with Danny's 911 plea, each detail anchored to an exhibit. The clerk efficiently marked them as I went. Dispatch recordings, security logs, email chains. When I reached the part about armed officers arriving before my call even connected, the judge's eyebrows lifted. "And you have documentation of this response time?" she asked. "Yes, Your Honor." I pointed to the timestamp comparison. The dispatch log shows units were already en route before anyone assessed Danny's condition. Carl stepped forward then, his paramedic's badge catching the light. His testimony was everything we'd hoped. Clear, professional, and devastating. He explained how dispatch had flagged family interference before any medical personnel evaluated the situation. Described watching officers physically remove me without cause. "In your experience," the judge asked him, "is this standard protocol?" "No, Your Honor. We assess first, then determine if security is needed." This was completely backwards. Behind the hospital's counsel table, my brother sat with his arms crossed, face carefully blank, but I caught the muscle jumping in his jaw. A tell from childhood that meant things weren't going his way. The judge turned to the consent forms. "These signatures appear inconsistent," she said, comparing documents. "And the notary timestamp on the original cannot be matched in hospital records. Can counsel explain this?" The hospital's lawyer stood, straightening his tie. "Your Honor, all decisions were made in the patient's best interests. The board's support of the current guardian reflects—" "That's not what I asked," the judge cut in. "I asked about document authenticity and timing. Why was a new protocol fast-tracked without standard review? Why schedule a capacity evaluation immediately after gaining board support?" My brother leaned forward to whisper something to his lawyer. I felt the baseball cap in my pocket, its worn brim familiar under my fingers. Danny had worn it to every appointment until the fevers took hold. The hospital's counsel tried again. "Your Honor, if I could have time to consult—" "No." The judge's tone could have frozen coffee. "Here's what's going to happen. The new protocol is suspended pending full review. I want the capacity evaluator's credentials on my desk by noon. If these documents prove to be forged or improperly executed, there will be consequences beyond this hearing. Am I clear?" "Yes, Your Honor," the lawyer said, already reaching for his phone. "Bailiff, let's take 15 minutes while counsel gets their paperwork in order." I felt air return to my lungs for the first time in what felt like days. It wasn't a complete victory, but Danny was safe from that mysterious protocol for now. Time to breathe, time to think. As people shuffled to stand, I turned and caught my brother's eye. His expression was unreadable, but something had changed. The confidence was cracking. He bent to whisper urgently to his lawyer again. A small red light blinked at the back of the courtroom, a reporter's camera coming to life. My brother noticed it too. His head snapped up, and for just a moment I saw real fear flash across his face. The bailiff called for recess, and the room began to empty. I stayed at the podium, one hand still touching Danny's cap in my pocket. The morning sun had climbed higher now, throwing bright squares across the counsel tables and turning all those carefully crafted papers into evidence that couldn't be ignored. When the recess ended, I pulled out the consent forms we'd prepared on transparencies. The bailiff wheeled over a projector, and I laid the first signature sample on the glass. "Your Honor, this is my brother's verified signature from Danny's admission papers 3 months ago." I placed the second transparency over it. And this is supposedly his signature on the protocol consent from last week. The overlaid images told the story better than I could. Where my brother's real signature had sharp peaks and deep valleys, the newer one wavered uncertainly. The R in his middle name crossed at the wrong angle. The final stroke curved up instead of down. "Counsel," the judge addressed the hospital's lawyer. "Do you have the original consent for comparison?" The lawyer shifted his weight. "We cannot locate the physical document at this time. We're working with a scanned copy." A scan. The judge's tone could have chipped ice. "Of an original that's mysteriously missing. From last week." Carl stepped forward then, holding up a small recorder. "Your Honor, if I may, this is the dispatch audio from that night." The judge nodded, and Carl pressed play. The timestamp in the recording's header drew everyone's attention. 9:47 p.m. A full 13 minutes before Danny asked me to call 911. "Unit 4, respond to possible family interference situation." The dispatcher's voice crackled. "Subject matching previous complaint description, attempting to countermand authorized guardian's care decisions." The description that followed matched my brother's allegations word for word. The judge's pen scratched rapidly across her notepad. "And now," she said, "I believe we need to hear from the hospital administrator. Is the video link ready?" The clerk nodded, and the projector screen filled with the administrator's face. She sat stiffly in what looked like a conference room, hands folded on the table. "Please explain this email regarding fast-track approvals and high reimbursement pathways," the judge directed. That's standard billing automation language," the administrator said. "Our system flags certain treatment protocols for expedited processing." "And the trust fund mentioned in paragraph 3? I'm not familiar with any trust details. That would be handled by..." "Yet you wrote," and I quote, "confirmed eligibility via family contact." Who was that contact? The administrator's eyes darted off screen. "The current guardian. He flagged the protocol's eligibility status during our review." A rustle went through the courtroom. Behind me, I heard the soft clicks of a reporter's phone keyboard. "Let me be clear," the judge said. "You fast-tracked an experimental protocol based on payment eligibility rather than medical necessity?" "No, that is..." The administrator's composure cracked. "The board relied on the guardian's assessment. The same guardian whose signature we cannot authenticate." The judge turned to my brother. "Sir, your face suggests you might want to consult with counsel before we continue." My brother had gone chalk white. He grabbed his lawyer's sleeve, whispering urgently. The lawyer stood. "Your Honor, we request a brief recess to..." "Denied." The judge shuffled papers. "Based on the evidence before me, I'm ordering all board communications regarding this case produced by 2 p.m. today. Furthermore, temporary guardianship is hereby restored to Michael Carver pending final ruling." My hands shook as I gripped the podium. It was a crucial victory, but not complete. The judge hadn't addressed the forged documents yet. That shoe was still dangling. "We'll reconvene after lunch for final ruling on the evidence of fraudulent documentation," she announced. "Bailiff, please clear the courtroom." Through the glass doors I could see reporters gathering, phones and cameras ready. My brother stared at them too, his careful mask finally cracking. He looked like that scared kid who used to beg me to cover for him when Dad caught him breaking rules. But we weren't kids anymore. And this wasn't about borrowed baseball cards or dented fenders. The bailiff began herding people toward the doors. I stayed at my table, organizing exhibits with trembling fingers while the judge reviewed her notes. Each page in my binder felt like another brick in the wall between Danny and harm. But until that final ruling came down, I couldn't quite breathe easy. I smoothed my tie and checked my watch. 1:55 p.m. The afternoon session would start in 5 minutes. The courthouse hallway hummed with whispers and shuffling feet as people filed back in. My brother sat alone on a bench, his lawyer deep in urgent conversation with hospital counsel near the water fountain. You ever notice how time stretches like taffy right before the moment that changes everything? Those 5 minutes felt longer than the whole morning session. The bailiff called us to order at exactly 2 p.m. I stood as the judge entered, her expression giving nothing away as she settled behind the bench and arranged her papers. "Having reviewed the evidence presented this morning," she began, "along with supplemental documentation provided during recess, this court finds clear and convincing evidence of the following." My heart hammered against my ribs as she read from her notes. "First, the consent documents for the experimental protocol bear fraudulent signatures, as confirmed by forensic comparison with verified exemplars." The hospital's lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Second, There is overwhelming evidence of bad faith coordination between the current guardian and hospital administration to fast-track unnecessary treatments for a financial gain. My brother's head dropped forward slightly. Third, the hospital board demonstrated gross negligence in failing to verify documentation while facilitating potentially harmful medical decisions. She looked up from her papers, scanning the courtroom. The implications here go beyond civil matters. I am referring these documents and findings to the district attorney's office for review of potential criminal charges. A reporter slipped out the back door, phone already at his ear. I could almost hear the headlines being born. Therefore, it is the order of this court that all medical decision-making authority for Daniel Carver is permanently stripped from James Carver, effective immediately. The judge turned to my brother. Sir, you are hereby barred from any involvement in your nephew's care or financial affairs. Violation of this order will result in contempt charges. When we stepped into the hallway, it was like walking into a storm of flashing lights and thrust microphones. Reporters shouted questions about guardian fraud and hospital conspiracy. Through the press crowd, I caught a glimpse of my brother being cornered by a news crew, his face ashen as the reporter fired questions about forged documents and trust fund manipulation. I pushed past them all, court order in hand, and headed straight for the hospital. The board chairman's office was dark when I arrived, his nameplate already missing from the door. A nurse told me he'd resigned that afternoon, along with the administrator who'd testified. Danny's eyes lit up when I walked in. Uncle Mike? Are you allowed to be here? More than allowed, buddy. I held up the court order. I'm back in charge. The next few hours were a blur of doctors reviewing charts and revising orders. The experimental protocol vanished, replaced with standard treatments we knew worked. Danny's vital signs stabilized almost immediately. You know that moment when you've been holding your breath so long you forgot you were doing it? That's how it felt watching his color improve over the next few days. The machine's beeping settled into familiar rhythms instead of those jarring alarms. 3 weeks later, I helped Danny take his first wobbly lap around the nurse's station. Hospital staff who'd avoided eye contact since the hearing suddenly found urgent business in other corridors. The board members who used to cluster importantly around his door were nowhere to be seen. Think I can make it to the window? Danny asked during one of our walks, stronger now but still learning his limits. One step at a time, kid. I kept my hand ready behind his back as he shuffled forward. We've got nothing but time now. Yesterday morning, I arrived before sunrise to sign his discharge papers. The night nurse handed me the forms without meeting my eyes, then hurried off to her rounds. I packed Danny's few belongings, phone charger, some books, his favorite sweatshirt, into the duffel bag I'd brought. The elevator doors opened onto the lobby, and there they were again. Camera crews setting up their equipment, reporters checking microphones. Word of Danny's discharge had leaked somehow. But this time, their presence felt different. This wasn't about scandal anymore. It was about survival. About truth outlasting lies. I adjusted Danny's lucky baseball cap as we waited for the doors to close. The hat had sat in my coat pocket through every hearing, every late-night strategy session, every small victory that led to this moment. The lobby doors whispered open, and Danny gripped my arm a little tighter. Camera flashes exploded like lightning, turning the morning into a strobing mess of light and shouted questions. Mr. Carver, how does it feel to expose the conspiracy? Danny, are you relieved to be going home? Any comment on your brother's indictment? I kept my hand steady on Danny's back, guiding him through the gauntlet. Remember when you were a kid, and your dad would shield you from rain with his jacket? That's what this felt like, protecting someone smaller from something cold and relentless. Danny's recovery is our only focus right now, I said, not breaking stride. The reporters parted just enough to let us through, their microphones hovering like curious insects. A headline scrolled across a news ticker on the lobby TV. Hospital board members resign amid guardian fraud investigation. Below that, James Carver faces multiple charges in trust fund scheme. Danny didn't look up at the screen. He just kept his eyes on the exit, one foot in front of the other. The automatic doors opened to real sunlight, not the fluorescent kind he'd lived under for weeks. He squinted and smiled, like someone remembering an old friend's face. The parking lot stretched out ahead of us, still damp from morning dew. My car sat right where I'd left it that first night, back when everything changed. How many times had I paced this concrete, rehearsing arguments and reviewing documents with Carl? Now it was just asphalt again. No longer a war room. I opened the passenger door and helped Danny ease into the seat while camera crews jockeyed for position behind us. The duffel bag, stuffed with get-well cards and half-finished puzzle books, settled into the back seat with a soft thump. "Hold on a second," I said, reaching across to the dashboard. Danny's baseball cap sat there, waiting. The same one he'd asked me to keep safe that night when the monitors started screaming. The night my brother thought he could rewrite our story with badges and boardrooms. I lifted the cap carefully, like it was made of glass instead of worn cotton. The brim was curved just the way Danny liked it. Not too sharp, not too flat. Some kids are particular about their lucky charms, you know? Standing there in the doorframe, I placed it on his head with the kind of gentle focus you use when handling something precious. Danny reached up and adjusted it slightly, muscle memory taking over. The movement was so normal, so everyday, that for a second the cameras disappeared. The words from yesterday's final ruling echoed in my head. Stripped of all authority, referred for prosecution, medical decisions permanently paused, legal language that built a wall between my brother and any power over Danny's future. The same words that made hospital brass study their shoes in elevators and sparked "resigned for personal reasons" emails. I closed Danny's door softly and caught movement across the lane. Carl stood by his ambulance, arms crossed, watching us with a slight smile. The same guy who'd risked his job to pull dispatch records and testimony when everyone else looked away. He gave me a single nod, the kind that says more than a speech ever could. Walking around to the driver's side, I heard a reporter call out one last question. "What made you keep fighting when everyone said you were wrong?" I paused with my hand on the door handle. Danny looked over at me, cap brim shading his eyes, waiting to hear what I'd say. "The truth always outlives the lie," I said simply, and got in the car. The engine started with a familiar rumble as cameras flashed their final bursts. Danny reached for the radio dial. Another normal thing, another piece of his world sliding back into place. I put the car in drive, and we left the hospital behind, smaller and smaller in the rearview mirror.